start up, if you would like, with a summary of. I mean, we have now the announcement of the joint venture. I just wondered if you'd both like to go back and base or tell us what your experience has been in terms of forming your own separate companies, where that knowledge has come from, and then we can go from the base of those two companies into the joint venture. So whoever would like to start. Okay, go. Oh, right.
Go ahead, you. You're on mute.
Right, thanks. Begin. I used to be in the Royal Air Force, Andrew, 23 years in the Royal Air Force, and I took early retirement back in 2012. Went to work for a small local company, got a little bit bored, set up my own company. And I looked into the market with my background from the military, which was in the sort of growing area of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which we as the Royal Air Force had really started trying to grapple with from about 2007 onwards. And fortunately, I was the person in the chair at that time between sort of 2007 to when I left, charged with developing the capability for the Royal Air Force. And I don't mean, you know, an MQ-9 or another aircraft. I mean the holistic view of how ISR will create understanding of an environment so that we can make decisions at tempo.
So the concept of operations, really, I guess.
Yeah, it was the first time the Royal Air Force, I think, tried to step away from simply having tactical effect and dropping a bomb to actually understand the broader scope of the environment. You know, back in those days, it was still limited to mainly the physical domain. Virtual was coming in a little bit, but it was mainly physical. But of course, that's developing more and more into the information sphere as we go on. So that was my specialization as I left. I moved straight into that sphere in the commercial sector. Set up my own company, initially consulting for a Swedish company. Swedish at the time. They were called UMS Skeldar, as they became later.
I know David Williams well.
So I worked with them in the early days, setting up their operational capability and their training, etc. And then as my company grew, we expanded into what I would call major militaries within Europe. We support NATO, the Royal Netherlands Air Force, the Spanish. We're just in talks with the German Air Force, so we're pretty well respected amongst the European NATO nations to supply ISR training for them.
Right, that's exactly what you mean by support, to work with them to get them to understand the concept and provision of ISR support.
Correct. So we provide training for all of those guys, plus the Dutch in particular. We've worked as a consultant, I guess you would call it, to help them develop their holistic CONOP, as you would say. And we've been able to get them to FOC within 18 months. Actually, it was over the COVID period.
Wow.
I know it was really, I mean, hats off to the Dutch. They adopted online, collaboration within 2 weeks of lockdown. And they realized that they got all their staff at home doing nothing or very little. So they invested all of that time into developing their CONOPs. So it was a refreshing, approach to the problem. It was really good. So we work with those in the military sphere, and then in the sort of, I don't know what you call it, the blurred line between military and commercial. We have worked with entities like the Botswanan Defence Force counter-poaching, helping them understand how to use intelligence better. The Singaporean police, Indonesian army. We've worked with universities in Saudi Arabia. It's quite a broad portfolio of people with whom we work. And as of probably about a year ago, we started working or looking around Canada We had some friends in Canada, a particular military group, and then we teamed up with Sean, and the rest, well, is what we're going to talk about later on, I guess.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So my background is I'm an economist from University of Calgary, as well as a commercial helicopter pilot. I'm actually just converting to also be a fixed-wing pilot. And basically, what was clear from the civilian side was in especially around 2014, both the technology had advanced sufficiently, as well as cell phone technology was kind of micronizing cameras, chips. You saw, companies like Parrot and several others, 3DR, from more of a hobbyist side coming into more of a professional surveying, mapping capability. And then in 2014, in the fall, the regulations from Transport Canada changed to issue standard permits called special flight operating certificates. And that was basically the starting pistol for a true, more enterprise level, more sophisticated aviation-based approach to unmanned systems. So incorporating unmanned systems into traditional aviation structures, and from that lens, realizing that they're not that different. They're still aircraft. You just had to change the position of where the resources had to be applied. So what were the safety factors, that kind of thing, and then roll it out into a repeatable industrial level program. So we've been audited and approved and have master service agreements with basically all the major upstream and midstream oil and gas companies here in Canada. And certainly being located in Calgary, that was a prime focus for a long time. And then as we started growing, we started incorporating people with more military flavor as a way of seeing where the future was with regards to max gross weight class, comms, links, payloads, ISR capability, and finding ways to incorporate that into the civilian sphere. And then realizing that from the industrial side, from the commercial side, there were advantages to data analytics, airspace integration requirements that weren't being observed or required to be developed on the military side, and then bringing that back into the defense side. So the interoperability between the two really gave us perspective of how to do it for Fortune 500 companies at scale, as well as how to address issues on the military side. And over the last 3-4 years, we've been winning programs and addressing specifically smaller UAVs, growing up the platform capability. We're now on a team called Team Artemis with CAF for CAF RPAS, which is with L3, Airbus, Lockheed Martin, ATCO, and IEI. And this is the single largest procurement in Canadian history. It's a 25+ year program. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that we were trying to address, again, the distinct requirements of unmanned systems to be taken in a traditional manned aviation construct and then advanced for that technology specifically. So it's allowed us to look at where the gaps are, especially globally. And what we're seeing is the need for airspace integration for unmanned systems. So a lot of the current deployments for military systems, for example, are in class F restricted or in a theater with flight corridors. And the reality is that only works when there's an active war, and that 99% of the time when you're not at active or inactive theater. How do you resolve airspace issues? How do you incorporate military systems or military grade size of systems into civilian airspace to really advance the capability further? And then talking with Ewen, how do you not only have the ability to acquire a system, get into the airspace, but get actionable intelligence out of it? So not buying a system, not buying a drone XYZ, but getting the capability, the end result, which is the reason why you're flying them, data dissemination, situational awareness, and effect. So we think that having all those aspects really provide a full capability to the customer.
Mm. So, I mean, you both recognised that. How did it come about? How did the partnership come about, or the joint venture joint announcement come about? How, did one approach the other, or how did that work?
I think it was I don't know. From my perspective, Sean and I had been working on a particular, not really a project, but a particular focus area in Canada, which we can't really divulge, but it was a particular thing that we were both working on together, but independently. Sean's approach was providing the practical skills to operate a UAS, and I was approaching the same project from the operational aspect of, how to squeeze the intelligence out of the UAV and how to enable decision making. And we had been working semi-independently for a while, and I think we mutually agreed, or mutually understood, that it'd be much better to work together, because we're almost the yin and yang of UAS training. With Sean's company and Sean's skills, particularly in the certification and the BVLOS side of house in Canada, and the ability, which I think is unique still, but Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, in Canada, to provide this BVLOS service, plus my sort of part of the puzzle, which was linking that functional capability to the operational capability of employing a UAV, all to come up with this concept which allowed a client or an end user to not only purchase a UAV and fly it safely, but to purchase a UAV, fly it safely, employ it correctly and effectively to enable decision making at tempo and understanding. And therefore we thought that this gives better value. I think both Sean and I, we've been around the world, and we've seen certain companies sell a UAV and they sell the pilot training or the tech training, and then that company leaves, and the end user is left with a fantastic system with a couple of pilots that can fly it, but with no concept of how to integrate that capability with warfighting.
Right. Yeah.
That's what we wanted to offer the client. How to squeeze all of their, the hard-earned cash out of this capital investment by actually employing it for what it's used, what it's intended for.
Yeah. It reminds me of the how the British Army introduced the Apache. You train to fly and then you train to fight. So it's two distinct sort of elements to it. And I do get what you mean by that. You have to know how to operate it, and in what kind of airspace, and within what regulations, and then within that, as you say, get the right kit on board to make sure that it's going to deliver what you actually are buying it for in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, where Sean and I identified a sort of not really a gap, it's a lapse, I think, a lapse in the end user's understanding. It's the investment in people. If you get the trained personnel, not only to fly and maintain it, and the sensor operator, but the intelligence analyst, the commander, the guy on the ground. How does the guy on the ground task a UAV if they've never had one before? What do they ask for? How do they ask for it? How do they maneuver a land unit with a UAV? All of this broader aspect. There are pockets of training go around, but there's nothing holistic. And Sean and I came up with this training program, which actually takes you from zero, almost, zero, all the way through ground school aviation, through IFR rating, well, not really rating, but IFR training. Yeah. Also the operational wraparound as well. So your pilots and your sensor operators come out at the end fully trained, fully qualified, and being able to certified in accordance with their country, but also have a full understanding of where they sit in the scheme of things.
And what is the the range of systems that we're talking about here. I mean, you know, I saw Desert Hawks flying in the first trip I went to Afghanistan, and then you're going all the way up to Protector and beyond that. So, you know, what is your partnership looking to address in terms of UAVs?
So that's a great question, in the sense that the big aha moment we had too was when we discovered that we weren't that crazy, that there were NATO stand eggs that were basically indicating the same direction that we were looking at. And there was a pathway to escalate that capability as required. And as you had mentioned, the traditional OEM approach has been, I'm going to sell a system and then it's type training dash pilot, whereas we're saying be pilot dash type training. And that gives you the ability to escalate systems requirements, the ability to move with the technology, and the ability to interface with the airspace, especially civilian airspace, with operational airworthiness, integrity, and that really, I think it's a very powerful concept. And the other aspect, there's basically 4 different buckets within that NATO ATP. The first 2 are relatively basic, the more visual line of sight, smaller systems. The second 2 increase weight class and complexity over population density, ground space, population density airspace, and the requirement to have detect and avoid technology and how to use it properly, which is a relatively novel concept. So because of what we're trying to do, or what we're doing in Canada, we're having to cover massive expanses of space. Where a lot of the mine sites and the oil and gas sites are, we're talking, you know, Arctic Circle, no road access, winter roads maybe, and certainly a lot of MOB and demob access issues. So we had to come up with a system to really leverage the capability of UAVs in terms of comms links, endurance, the data acquisition capability, with the access to the airspace, and that required detect and avoid radar technology. And never thought we were going to have to get into that, but we did as a result, because there wasn't anything else on the market. There really still isn't. And what we've been able to do is basically leverage marine radar systems to see out north of 8 nautical mile radiuses. We're covering 140,000 square acres per MOB and demob. That airspace access, that full leverage of the capability is unique, and it requires very specific ConOps, very specific technical training, maintenance training, and pilot training in order to access that full capability. When you go from military airspace to civilian, you cannot assume that you have cooperative airspace. They don't, especially in Canada, don't have mandatory transponder technology. Most of them don't have actual radios. They barely turn it on or use them properly. They're not using NOTAMs. It is the least amount of infrastructure possible for an advanced aviation airspace. And so under that assumption, you basically have to set up your own airport or your own airspace awareness picture, and then be able to operate under them.
Do you have an area in Alberta that you can close off and use as almost like a closed range?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually the other huge resource that we have access to, is the restricted airspace within it's called a place called Foremost. It's southern Alberta. It's near the Montana border.
Right.
And I've been working on different ways of describing the scale of these things with you, and it's basically the size of Luxembourg. Within Alberta, we also have 3 Canadian Forces bases, and the largest one. Oh, sorry, you there? Oh, you're back. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry,
so we do.
I got a break for half a minute.
No worries. So yeah, so we do have access to civilian-controlled Class F airspace to be turned on and off as required. We also have a radar integrated into the test range for a number of reasons, but provide a secondary level of surveillance, as well as access to military bases all the way up from southern Alberta to the northern Alberta foremost is massive and comprehensive, but it also requires, again, that civilian airspace integration. You must have a permit to operate there. That's your who, what, when, where, why.
Right.
In order to get the bigger systems there, you must have traditional aviation, ops manuals, maintenance manuals, maintenance control, safety management systems, training manuals, all that. It has to be a completely, fully robust structure, as well as having detect and avoid in some circumstances, in order to be able to operate in civilian airspace. And we have that access and logistics capability to bring in foreign clients as required, insert that bespoke or off-the-shelf UAV, whatever capability they've already purchased, or we can advise them on the purchase.
I was going to say, I see a potential for everything from, say, military customers who already have their own UAV, and as you've illustrated earlier, have a gap in exactly how they're going to operate this, through to those who are actually considering purchasing systems and might want to see how it works before they buy. Is that the case, that you're working with both sort of kinds?
Yes, absolutely. And exactly that, in the sense that I think, especially as we're seeing across the world, is the escalation of procurement from every single country, because they know they need this capability, and they're not quite sure how to get there. And then even when they do get it, they may be airlocked from accessing the true capability. So if I can't fly on land, because especially in European airspace is very congested already, you have to fly offshore, and then you're running the risk of having a greenhorn, with a multi-million-dollar system, running offshore and all that kind of thing.
Frozen again.
Oh,
So it froze again. Sorry.
sorry. Which part did you hear? Sorry.
Yeah, after greenhorn, I lost.
Right. Fair enough.
So I got the gist of it, that you could have somebody who didn't know what they were doing trying to fly in uncontrolled airspace and that kind of thing.
Yeah. You've certainly seen it more often where you buy $1 million systems and they can't have access to using them, so they basically sit idle, especially during peacetime. And while they're just sitting there, the enemy is advancing their capability, their interoperability, their use of the asset relative to the traditional military systems, manned aviation and tanks and so on. And so that's really the issue that we're trying to address, is it's all about your counter agent, right? Counter agency issues. Who are you going up against? What are they facing? What are they realizing as they access this technology? And what are we having to deal with as rules-based system advanced countries? And so they don't have to, for example, the green men don't have to get special flight operating certificates to fly whatever drone in XYZ part of their country. They just do it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas we have to run through the risk analysis and scenarios in order to be able to do that. And that's a barrier, especially throughout Europe, throughout NATO countries, which this training specifically addresses. The technical airworthiness aspect is a relatively known quantity. It can be solved if it's not there already. The operational airworthiness aspect, I think, is underserved, and that access to civilian airspace as a tool to escalate and advance the systems and have interoperability is what we're resolving with this infrastructure, this training package.
Yeah, I know. For a considerable while in the UK, there was only the airspace around a certain airport in Wales, and that was it.
Right.
So as long as you wanted to fly in tight circles, that was okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is one of the significant. This is one of the key elements of this training package that Sean and I put together, is that although we sort of pitched it in Canada, we can blueprint that to anywhere around the world, really, if we've got the real estate to do so.
Right.
But the fact that we've got this range, we can take the client from through ground school, through IFR understanding of instrument flying and the GCS flying, how to operate as a crew. And we can scale that from a class 1 to a class 3. So, class 1, it will be pretty straightforward. So the intelligence will come out from the UAV into the GCS or the laptop or whatever they're using. And the exploitation of that is relatively straight.
Again.
Can you hear me now?
You've just come back. Yeah. I just got whatever they're using, but keep going. Let's continue with it.
It's really class 1 to class 3, what I was saying, Andrew, and we will scale the training, accordingly from those sort of aspects.
Right.
And the real estate that Foremost Range gives us allows us to take the client further than just conversion to type training and rate licensing. We can take them all the way to a full up mission rehearsal.
Right. So
we're trying to bring back parity. Sean's identified this this disproportionate advantage or asymmetric advantage the adversary has at the moment over us, in the fact that they can generally fly without restrictions, and they can go and fly in their backyard of Syria or Libya or wherever they want to go and do their thing and practice. Whereas in the liberal West, we are mandated to follow rules, so we can't practice at the same tempo that our adversary is.
Right.
So therefore, they're getting to be honest, they're getting better than us. And Foremost and mission rehearsal will enable us. It's a bit like the old red flag days, when the dog fights. So we invented red flag to get parity back in dogfighting. This is effectively the same philosophy. We want to bring back parity to enable our guys to go and train in a full mission rehearsal under test ranges, but in a full mission rehearsal, so that when they do deploy, they're more on a level playing field.
Right.
And we also had a very good discussion yesterday with a potential client, and they were saying that, well, a defensive organization like a NATO military will not necessarily fight overseas. They may fight a defensive operation in their own territory, and it may be a sub-threshold activity that be after the declaration of conflict. So therefore, you need this capability of employing a UAV within your own national airspace before war has been declared. So all civilian regulations apply. And again, this is where Sean's advances with BV loss and certification come to the fore. So you're going to get operational excellence across class 1 to class 3 with a full mission rehearsal from a counterinsurgency type thing in Afghanistan or wherever it is next, all the way across to a counter-terrorism operation downtown London or in your own backyard. And we can sort of scale the scenarios and the training accordingly to meet those requirements that come into us.
Right. And in terms of conversion to role, I mean, you wouldn't be presuming to look at operations with air forces and ground forces. I would imagine you've got to draw lines somewhere. So you're doing conversion to type, conversion to role, and really from the time that the sensor offloads that information to another, that's really where your job ends, right?
Not so much, no, because we are going to train, and we've got the security clearances and all that sort of stuff. We can train, and our objective is to train the whole data trail. So from the question the commander wants answered, to the task given to the UAV, to the flying, the safe execution of that flying mission, to the capturing of the data by the sensor operator, the transmission of that data to the analyst, the creation of intelligence and understanding, and the transmission or dissemination of that understanding back to the decision maker, so they can make decisions. So we don't stop at sensor operators succeeded at sensor on target, we stop. The decision has been made correctly and on time. Because unless you can do that, unless you can create that linkage between data, intelligence, decisions, there's no point in flying a UAV.
Right. And the commanders and the analysts need to know what the state of the possible is, what the art of the possible.
Exactly.
What is impossible in terms of flying and time and scale and all that distance, everything like that.
Yeah. And likewise, the analyst has previously, or probably even currently, analysts are the guys and girls in the dark room who nobody ever sees. But in reality, if we look at the way in the USAF do their work, the analyst is the tasking authority for the sensor, because the analyst uses the data from the sensor. It's common sense, but nobody else does it. So these guys and girls are massively clever and massively important to the whole process, because they will tell the commander what is possible, not just in the collection, but actually in the understanding. And that voice needs to be heard. And we're going to bring all these people to the table so that the whole, as I say, the holistic capability of the UAV is brought to bear.
Yeah. The other aspect I see too is that this is not just a unique capability for the Air Force. The Air Force will be in charge of maybe the overriding infrastructure, providing certification and permitting, potentially, and especially operating and maintaining the NATO Class 3s. However, Special Forces, Navy, and Army will have columns within the NATO Class 1s to the ends of the NATO Class 2s. And they need to know how to speak the language with the Air Force to get the permits to be able to accomplish their specific role within the whole ecosystem.
We're on breakup again.
Bugger. Are you back?
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm just back. Sorry. There we go.
Sorry.
Back again.
Right on. So what we've identified is the distinction that unmanned systems, especially for NATO countries, will have to have a level of aviation prowess or understanding within all of their armed forces, special forces, Navy, and Army, in addition to the Air Force. And they need to understand the language. They need to understand the 100+ years of learnings from manned aviation and apply it to this context. They're still operating an aircraft within an ecosystem of manned aviation. How to do that safely in order to be able to get access again to the civilian and other airspace classes, to be able to actually use this and deploy it and get that information.
It's come a long way from the Desert Hawks in the early days of Afghanistan that were operated by the Royal Artillery, and
right.
the RAF had nothing to do with it, and hands off.
Yes. Yeah, and there was a lot of lessons from that, right? It got to a point where that couldn't, it was reasonable for a point in time where the Air Force said, "Oh, that's below us," and technically it was, they're really only operating at maybe 400 feet or whatever. But now it's a full stack. You need, and what we're seeing, especially in places like Azerbaijan, in Syria, in South China Sea, is the layering of unmanned systems, both in terms of weight class, but also their cost. So it's a war of cost infrastructure. Where you have your cheap and your ubiquitous swarm ahead to light up the SAM sites, your more expensive targeting EW or SAM sites, radars in advance of your more traditional manned aviation or artillery or tanks or that kind of thing. And that staggering of cost and capability, and that staggering of land forces, Navy, and Air Force with regards to unmanned systems in the first wave, and then how do they work together? How do they coordinate properly? And in the scenario where it isn't an overt all-out action, it's just before the line of true war. How do they play? And we're hitting that red line, or going to be hitting that red line on a go-forward basis almost every day of the week. All aspects within the armed forces have to, at a minimum, be well versed in the airmanship requirements of the unmanned systems, such that they don't trigger the overspill potentially. If they don't understand the airspace structure or where it's delineated or how, both in 2 and 3 dimensions, they could inadvertently cause these issues, right?
Yeah.
Where is the line? If you don't have that language or that understanding or infrastructure, you're not able to bring the capability. You're going to have to derate the capability because you can't bring it to its natural conclusion.
Yeah, you're going to be losing elements that you really could utilize, but don't have the capability for it.
We've seen this war gaming in Taiwan, haven't we? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
really?
just going to escalate. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. I was going to say, do you teach counter UAS? So the guys out there trying to find the UAS, are you now in that loop of trying to protect the UAS from being countered?
So I think in order to understand what your enemy can do with them, you have to understand how you would use them.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically of Ukraine and the amount of UAVs that have gone down there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Ewan.
Sorry, Sean. Yeah, we don't specifically teach counter UAVs, but we do in the training package, we do teach all of the aspects of the team how to understand the threats to your UAV operations.
Right.
Be that EW attack, be it physical attack, whatever. But threat awareness and threat mitigation is one of the critical aspects of the post sort of conversion to type training. Once you're confident on type, then we go into the tactical phase, which is all about learning about threats and what's going to hurt you and take you out of the sky.
So if you were to highlight a 1, 2, 3 of recommendations for any user coming to think about giving you their business, what would be the main considerations that you'd ask them to think about as they were going to approach you?
I think from my perspective, I'll let Sean have a think, but I think from my perspective and my experience, actually, I've worked with UAV training both in Indonesia, Germany, and in Sweden to an extent. And my recommendation to any future client would be, if you do a holistic training package, your return on your investment is going to be better. Your road to full operational capability will be quicker.
Yeah.
And we all know, especially in Europe, if you spend, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds, euros on a UAV, the government wants a good headline. They don't want to pay, they want a good, successful headline. And I think that would be the main benefit to a potential client. We can accelerate FOC probably by 12 months, and that ROI just goes exponentially up. So that on the strategic level, that's what I would, suggest to a client.
Yeah.
Sean, have you got any?
Yeah, from what I've seen, especially as the systems get larger, they think in the same paradigm as what they're used to, in the sense that they say airframe first, data second. Whereas, why are you doing this in the first place? It is the data. So think about the concepts of what you want to do today, and then enable yourself to have an evergreen strategy for all the data use cases in the future, right? And then work back from that. That should define your endurance. That should define your payload capability, what payloads you have on board, the interoperability of those. So I'll go from there first. because that's a pretty chronic issue. Even in the largest tenders, they don't talk about how they're going to analyze the data or what they're going to actually get out of it. They know they need it because this historical precedent, especially from the United States and Israel, where it has been very effective. But why has it been effective? What problems are you trying to solve, right? The other aspect I would say, get over the notion and the marketing from DJI that these are toys or tools outside of the traditional aviation to be used for a specific purpose, and leverage the history of aviation for your benefit. Don't see it as an encumbrance or barrier to entry. See it as lessons that have already been learned, such that you don't have to relearn them. I'm doing my fixed wing type training yesterday, and they're like putting in the spins. And the guy's like, "This is how you do it, counter with the rudder and everything like that." And I realize how many people died learning this, right?
Yeah.
How many people didn't get the ISR capability from a UAV because they didn't understand how to do that, and as a result, some kid on the ground isn't here today, right? Get beyond it, and then create the infrastructure and a long-term vision to use this, because your counterparties are, and you really need to get ahead of this, and then think about the airspace as an asset, right? Where can I go such that I can fly the flight volume to delineate all these issues in advance? But we're really presenting, especially within the Canadian context of the foremost test range, is a harp back to history. And this is why I love aviation, because it all exists. It's all well documented. This is basically the Commonwealth Air Training Plan for unmanned systems. This the largest single contribution Canada ever gave to World War II was training 150,000 aircrew.
Right.
And we just weaponized this space, right? Was learn it all here, was learn it away from the front lines, figure it all out, and then assert it. And then do so in the context of the prairies, where you just have airspace for days. You're not flying over complex urban environments or over the ocean, and you have the ability to have interoperability with BATIS or other tank, other aspects of modern warfare, and then advance that capability stack, because that stack is a hedge. It's a strategy to say if one goes down, then the other can take over. It also increases your velocity, which has always been the initiative has always been the highest order advantage of anyone who's successful. If you can understand the technology, implement it in the airspace, and then have it at a faster rate than the counterparty, you will win. Right, but that takes a lot of training.
Yeah, I mean, what I've got from this is certainly an understanding that any user, we know that UAS operations are one of the flavors of the month at the moment. Everybody's rushing out to try and get themselves a system. Sometimes it's led by senior ranks wanting the biggest and the best and better than the country next door. But you have to think about what you want them for, what you want to deliver, and understand the payload, and understand how you're actually going to fly to get that payload, then get that ISR, and then deliver it back in whatever environment, whether it's a counter-terrorism flying over a city in Europe, or whether it's along the edge of a peer-to-peer conflict before it goes hot. And there seems to be an awful lot of opportunity and different levels of training involved in that, from the person who actually flies it through to those who task it, and all the way down to the analysis level. But understanding, I think, the one I would say most of your customers probably don't or will not get is that, how do I operate it in airspace before the flying? I mean, how do I actually do this? and then how do I get the result of it? So it seems like a good partnership.
Yeah, we're pretty happy with it.
There we
We
go.
haven't been able to have beers about it, but yet, just because of COVID. But we'll get there. But yeah.
I look forward to you buying me my first then.
Yeah.
Great
No,
stuff.
it's really exciting. And I really appreciate your time looking at this. From an aviation history geek, for me, it's like the fourth wave of aviation, inception, the jet age, helicopters, and then now unmanned systems. And so how do you really work? How do you make it? Right? Gosh. All right.
Sorry. Sorry, I missed most of that, unfortunately, but yeah, it's been an interesting discussion, and on a current theme of import to virtually every operator going out there. So let's keep in touch and take it forward again next time when you got some more news, and might see you at Farnborough next year or something like that, or maybe we'll see.
Yeah, that's a great something to look forward to for sure.
Andrew,
Excellent.
do you want me to send some imagery and some other information? So some imagery from the Canadian side.
Yeah, if you got some imagery, and actually, if you do get a recording, doesn't have to be visual. There were moments that I lost touch on places where the gents were describing something. So even if it's just a sound file, I'd find that useful.
I'll save as an MP3 or whatever. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, MP3 would be fine.
Yeah, perfect.
It was good talking to you, gents. Very good.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoy the weekend.
Good luck with the venture.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.